Hey, how's it going guys? My name is Aylwood and today we are looking at Tales of Lazo, a game just recently released on Steam, and to answer the ultimate question, is it worth your time? So, Tales of Lazo is a single-player, indie, pixel art, command-based RPG adventure platformer. Set in your classic fantasy medieval world, you'll be tackling the game's many platforming challenges, fighting enemies in real-time combat, and using the very interesting command-based story-like mechanic to make every single action in the game. So, aesthetically, Tales of Lazo is clearly a 16-bit inspired game due to the design of all the visual assets of the game, not including, however, general text or the main character's designs. These instead take on a more 8-bit style. Now, the text I understand, but for the main character to be so different is a bit unusual. Colours used are quite pale and dull in general, which gives the game a slightly more serious look as opposed to the more typical overly bright platformer that I was expecting from a game like this. But I prefer this style of colour used anyway, so it's all good. Textures and detail are pretty top notch for a 16-bit inspired game. Things like cracked stone flooring, elevated wooden platforms, various background designs and more all look incredibly detailed and give a surprisingly good illusion of depth perception due to the brilliant shading used. Ground clutter is perfect, with the occasional background graphic to give a bit of life to the simple foreground designs, especially with the indoor areas. No actual lighting effects that interact with foreground visuals, but the many fires and torches in the game are so cozy and simple I actually love them. Even piles of gold are nice looking and stand out extremely well. No way you'll be missing them due to the shines and sparkles that they give off constantly. Very nice. Other effects like character melee attacks, flashes when damage taken, and the various spells available to you all look pretty impressive and do add to the gaming experience very well. The Dzverse spell though, I have to be honest, did not match the expectations of its description whatsoever. The UI could have been a bit better. Hearts, ability stars and gold are all fine. The text box should be relocatable to a preferred location, and the 3 very large buttons at the top of the screen should have been put at the bottom, or at least somewhere that isn't so centralized and where your character won't walk behind them on the higher platform areas. Level layouts are brilliant in my opinion, not too large and not too small. At a glance they would appear pretty short, but trust me, they're just right for the type of game this is, I can assure you, which we'll go into later. Character designs are by far the best visual assets of the game. Very impressive pixel art designs that definitely match that kind of serious look of the game. The Minotaurs and Wolves are definitely my favourite though, due to their outstanding combination of ferocity and simplicity. I love simple sprite designs, and when they're done well enough to maintain a high level of strength and power, yet without going too far into complexity, I fucking love it. Your character on the other hand is not so great. He is, as mentioned, 8-bit in a 16-bit world. Has been designed way too large, almost as big as a Minotaur, and as far as mythology estimates go, that's pretty big. His animations are also a bit out of place, with his stationary, movement and even attacking not quite matching up with the standard of the enemy designs at all. Funny enough, the very few bosses in the game are also very large 8-bit sprites. I'm not too sure why they would have made the decision to design the main character and bosses this way. Maybe to make platforming easier from a tile perspective, but surely they could have done that with a 16-bit character anyway, or maybe release date deadlines. But don't ask me, I can only speculate and have no idea. Still a bit of a shame though. But all the game's visuals brought together do give a very charming, cozy, even-paced feel that is full of character, even including the visuals that weren't the best. Overall, a pretty good job, I have to admit. The OSTs in Tales of Lazo are okay, I suppose. It is quite a big shame though that there's literally 3 tracks in the entire game. One at the main menu, one at certain boss fights, and one general stage soundtrack that you'll be hearing 97% of your entire playthrough. It is a bit difficult to talk about soundtracks when there's only 3 to go by, but the very few that they do have are pretty decent. Each track is fully orchestrated with plenty of gentle instruments used to give that calming, light-hearted feel to the game. The general track stage that you'll be hearing on constant repeat didn't get tedious for me whatsoever, funny enough, and definitely has a RuneScape/Final Fantasy feel to it, with its very distinct memorable melody, except with modern sound effects that I didn't mind at all. The main menu track is pretty generic, and the boss fight track is like a light-hearted Volga the Viking OST, which were both okay too. Again, big shame there aren't more tracks to give the different stages of the game their own character and ambience. But fortunately, the general stage track covers them all pretty well. Everything else sound related, like character, enemy and object interaction sounds, are all decent. I found after a while though, the typing sound when entering text into the text box did slowly become annoying by the end stages. But overall, although limited, a decent sound quality throughout. Now for the gameplay. So firstly, Tales of Lazo doesn't have any difficulty options to choose from. It is what it is whether you like it or not, just like every good game should be. When you first start the game, you're not given any kind of opening cutscene, dialogue intro or anything like that, not even a training stage. Literally all you get is this tutorial tip box, which funny enough I didn't even notice the show me button within it and just closed it straight off. Now that's what I call an introduction. Fortunately though, the game isn't exactly rocket science, so a training stage isn't really needed anyway if I'm honest. The story of Tales of Lazo is pretty non-existent. Well, sorry, your character's name is Lazo, which I suppose on some level is technically story. But this does make sense because if you haven't noticed already, you as the player are actively writing the game's story anyway. More on that in a sec. Which would mean that the game's lore is pretty much in real time from a certain perspective. If that wasn't the case though, there's literally nothing in-game to explain what your character is doing, where he is or why he's there, which I suppose they kinda get away with due to this game's core gameplay concept. So when you click begin story, you're thrown straight into the game and play. And speaking of core gameplay concept, I did mention that this is a command based game. This means every single movement, every single attack, spell, jump, every single action in the entire game is done purely through your little story box in the form of handwritten commands. Fair play guys, I have to admit, what an out of the box interesting idea for a game. It's this exact core concept that made me almost instantaneously buy this game in the first place, just to find out what it's like. And you know what, it's actually not that bad either. As for the story notes button, Lazo is controlled purely by manually inputting various commands which can be written in combination to make him do certain things. Almost like an extremely simple version of game coding. If any of you guys know much about coding, you should understand what I'm trying to get at. The default input text color is white, but when a possible command is written correctly, it will become a certain color to indicate it's an available command and is executed in the order written. For example, if you want Lazo to move left, you must write the word walk, then the word left. Or if you want him to walk towards an object and then do something, you can put the word continue, then the target, then the command. For example, continue, ladder, climb. As the game kind of demonstrates in the tutorial box and the trailer, you are supposed to enter white text as well as commands to give the entered commands context and I suppose to give a more immersive gaming experience. But let's be honest, you're probably going to do what I did and spam commands constantly and only write in white text if you're trying to be funny. I'll be honest, at the start of the game it did take me a while to get used to combination commands and where to position Lazo for optimum platforming. But don't worry, you'll pick it up pretty quickly as you play. Stages are complete by either killing a boss at the end or making Lazo interact with the red flag. Once levels are complete, you're giving a rating to how well you did with a few bits of tracked information. The game seems to promote collecting all items and in as few stories as possible, meaning pressing the tell story button as little as you can as opposed to writing many shorter stories. This is actually very fun, and on a few stages I tried to complete the whole area in only one story written, which after a lot of trial and error is actually extremely satisfying to do. During gameplay, try to prioritize collecting gold, obviously, proactively killing enemies to avoid typing while in combat, collecting elixirs to give you free spellcasts, meleeing enemies to generate skill points on each hit which are spent on spellcasts, and opening chests to find out secret words which will help you on your journey. Enemies will always take 1 heart per attack on the player, with harder enemies usually attacking faster because of this. If you die on a stage, you're put all the way back to the start with no kind of checkpoint system whatsoever, which when you're first starting out is pretty bullshit. But don't worry, it teaches you to get good quickly and I secretly prefer it anyway. Once a stage is complete and before you take on a new one, you're kinda brought to a stats shop screen, which allows you to spend collected gold in previous stages on extra hearts, extra skill points, spells and spell upgrades. points, each costing an increased amount of gold to force you to spend your points evenly. I recommend trying to spam extra hearts and the blast ability as quickly as possible, as these are by far the two most important in the game in my opinion. General combat and boss fights are trial and error for the most part for you to get used to them. Once you're confident, you should proactively write commands that you know will definitely kill the enemy in question before you're able to type again. Trust me, you do not want to get attacked when you're trying to write commands. Most enemies will attack you back after a certain amount of attacks that they've taken, so walking left and jumping back commands are very useful, especially when in doubt. A few other mentions: remember to enter the word cast before the name of the spell of your choice. I got all the way to stage 6 without knowing this very important detail. Don't worry, I know I'm off my head. If you think you're about to die, try to click the undo last button as fast as you can, because death, as mentioned, comes at a heavy price. And finally, the most important point: when in doubt, mouse over. There are plenty of question marks, enemy descriptions and general information available to mouse over, which gives you pretty much all the information you will ever need when tackling the various combat or platforming challenges. So for the ultimate question, is it worth your time? Its unique story / command mechanics make for a charming, refreshing, out-of-the-box challenge. Although quite short and unpolished, does provide an interesting, simple gaming experience. I'm going to give this game a 4-star or 76 out of 100. If this were your bog standard platformer, I probably wouldn't even recommend it. But because the command mechanic is so out of the box, it does make the game actually pretty fun. I like how you can either take a pure input command perspective or a more storyline perspective when entering your actions into the story box, which the latter is actually promoted by the devs too, which is nice. I like how getting stuck in reactive combat causes you to shit your pants, make constant spelling mistakes, and as you know, if you die, you're back to the beginning. The game does teach you basic proactively thinking and helps increase your type speed due to the no shortcut manual commands you'll be spamming constantly. There were even a few bugs during my playthrough that I had to make the devs aware of that were fixed pretty quickly. On the other hand though, the fact that only 2 OSTs are present in-game is pretty bad. The amount of enemy characters in the game are very few, which is a big shame. The question marks that give environmental information are a bit out of place and do reduce visual immersion slightly. Maybe sheens or shines on objects that you could mouse over instead would have been a bit better, and I would have much preferred fully 16-bit inspired visuals as opposed to a handful of characters being 8-bit and out of place. Overall though, a decent gaming experience that I would actually recommend to anyone interested in its story-like style of gameplay. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more games I'll be reviewing each week. I highly doubt I'll get my own house by the time we hit 100 subs for me to do the live stream. Dun dun dun! But I'm sure we'll sort something out guys, don't worry. But as always, all the best guys, take care.